Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson, back from a nasty bout with back pain. Can you relate? It's especially good to be with you on this Friday, July 22nd, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight. He refused to help the January 6th committee, and now Steve Bannon is convicted of contempt of Congress.
We may have lost a battle here today, but we're not going to lose this war.
What's next for President Trump's former strategist? Also, we'll review some of what we learned in last night's hearing, including emotional moments from Mike Pence's Secret Service detail and raw footage of the former president one day after the attack. Our look at abortion laws state by state continues in North Carolina. A new bill there proposed to punish abortions with death sentences. A local reporter who's on the story joins us live. And where can you go for great international cuisine? How about Missoula, Montana? A refugee program is pleasing palates and opening minds. Steve Patterson has tonight's feature report. So the January 6th committee is taking a break from public hearings until September. Today, a jury convicted one of its most sought-after witnesses for refusing to cooperate. The jury found former President Trump's strategist Steve Bannon guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress. His attorneys say he plans to appeal. Sentencing is set for October 21st. Mr. Bannon faces up to a year behind bars and fines up to $100,000. You can imagine what the committee might learn from him if he did testify and if he did turn over documents. Last night's hearing revealed quite a bit. It focused on the 3 hours between the end of President Trump's speech at the Ellipse, where he told his supporters to march to the Capitol, and the video he tweeted asking them to leave. The committee members detailed his inaction while the Capitol was under siege. They also put the hearing in a bigger context than just that awful day. Vice Chair Liz Cheney said, "This is all about America's future."
Every American must consider this. Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again?
Joining us now are NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos and Hugo Lowell, a congressional reporter for The Guardian. Welcome to you both. And Danny, let me start with you and something that Steve Bannon's lawyer said outside the courthouse after the verdict was read in terms of where this goes from here. Watch.
This is a bulletproof appeal. Have you ever in another case seen a judge 6 times say in the case that he thinks the standard for willfulness is wrong? He said it doesn't comport with modern jurisprudence. He said it doesn't comport with the standard, the traditional definition. But he said he feels his hands were bound by a 1961 decision. You will see this case reversed on appeal.
Danny, it sounds like what he's hinting at is some kind of legal wiggle room to excuse Steve Bannon for thumbing his nose at the January 6th committee and flat out refusing to cooperate.
Defendants have a constitutional right to present a defense. Bannon wanted to present a number of defenses that the judge pared down to almost nothing, really just arguing whether or not there was an issue about the timeliness of his response. But what counsel there is talking about is wanting to present a defense that Bannon relied upon the advice of his attorney. And the judge said, based on prior case law, I cannot allow that defense. What counsel there is saying, we get that the district judge had to follow the law. Now we're going to appeal it, and the people, the appellate court, who decide whether or not that law is still good law, they believe in bulletproof confidence that it will be overturned. I cannot believe how confident defense counsel is after losing a case. When I lose a case and I have to go talk to reporters outside, I'm psychologically in the fetal position, but these folks feel really confident about their appeal prospects.
Let's be clear about what would happen if they fail on these appeals. From what I understand, the court can sentence Mr. Bannon to prison time. They can fine him. They can't compel him to testify. That's not part of this legal process, right? So he might still get through all of this and not testify before the committee.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right. He will be sentenced. He will get sentenced, and then afterwards they will appeal the actual case itself, maybe even the sentence itself, but more likely the underlying trial, and they'll fight that in the courts. He might be able to stay out of jail pending his appeal only because his sentence is likely to be relatively short. He is facing a potential 2 years, but that's only if they consecutive and max him out. With 2 maximum 1-year sentences, the judge would have to give him the max on each and then run them consecutive to each other. That cannot happen because he has no prior record score that I'm aware of, and this is a federal misdemeanor. Federal misdemeanors are so rare, they scarcely ever happen in the system. The sentencing guidelines for the B and C misdemeanors don't even apply. This is the lowest crime that the federal sentencing guidelines apply to. He does have a mandatory minimum of 30 days. I would expect him to get the 30 days and nothing else.
So a kind of a small matter in terms of just sentencing, but a big deal, Hugo Lowell, at least for the committee, and what they had wanted from him. Here's a little bit more of the Vice Chair Liz Cheney speaking last night about the net effect of all of these hearings. Watch.
In the course of these hearings, we have received new evidence, and new witnesses have bravely stepped forward. Efforts to litigate and overcome immunity and executive privilege claims have been successful, and those continue. Doors have opened, new subpoenas have been issued, and the dam has begun to break.
Hugo, talk about that dam and what has been breaking through in the course of these hearings. Now that we've got a break in the hearings until apparently September, what's the net effect as you see it?
Well, the committee's been getting a lot of evidence laid into the investigation. I mean, if you think about Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, he only testified a couple of weeks ago, among other kind of pieces of information and other evidence that the committee's been receiving. And so I think now they're going to take a step back for a moment, you know, for the month of August, and they're going to assess that evidence and see whether they can advance that investigation anymore. I mean, Steve Bannon, who obviously got convicted today, had offered to testify to the committee. It sounds like that's off for now. It doesn't sound like Steve Bannon's furnished any documents. But there are a number of people in Steve Bannon's orbit and around Trump's orbit who have seen how these hearings have progressed and decided, actually, you know, I want to share my side of the story as well, not least because if I've already been subpoenaed or I think there's a subpoena on the way, I don't want to be held in contempt of Congress like Bannon. The fact that Bannon got convicted today, I think, you know, also reaffirms the fact that you may be prosecuted by the Justice Department. I think that's a really motivating factor for a lot of these guys.
Where does the committee go from here, particularly with the midterm elections coming up? I imagine they want to have some kind of a report or a document dump or some kind of finding, something to show for their work ahead of the midterm so that it can have some impact, particularly because there are still candidates who are winning primaries who continue to foment the so-called big lie about the election.
Yeah, that's right. So we caught up with the chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson, the other week before he was indisposed of COVID. And he told us on the steps of the Capitol that he expected to have an interim report, a scaled-back interim report towards the start of September. And they wanted to hold hearings around the release of that interim report in order to present further findings to the American people. And then they want to do a final report. And that's what's going to be key. The final report, after they do the final report, they have to disband that investigation in 30 days' time. So they don't want to issue that final report until they think they have all the pieces of evidence that they're ever going to get. And that could really extend. I mean, you know, when you talk to committee members, they make this point about how we're getting new information all the time. And if it wasn't for the people in Trump's orbit and for his allies not stonewalling this investigation, then we might have already been done. But the fact that they have been uncooperative means that we still have to go forward in the investigation, which may mean a final report might come in November or December.
Danny, I want to get to something from Merrick Garland, but I just want to clarify because Hugo just mentioned that Steve Bannon has offered to testify. This had to do with contempt of Congress and his intransigence about testifying. Can you clarify that detail? If he said he would, but he was still held in contempt of Congress, what's that about?
It's only a stunt, and here's why. There are two kinds of contempt. There's civil contempt, which is not what Bannon was charged with. Civil contempt is the court's power to force you to do something. And it's often said that in civil contempt, the contemptor holds the keys to his jail cell, both figuratively and literally, because I've had cases where contemptors are sent to jail, and as soon as they do what the court wants, they can get out. That's not what Steve Bannon was charged with. He was charged with the other varietal, which is criminal contempt. And criminal contempt is like any other crime. It punishes what you did in the past, irrespective of whether or not you offer to give the bank back the money that you stole from them. Same thing with Steve Bannon. He was already in contempt, and he's being punished by the DOJ, by the government, prosecuted for what he did in the past. So offering to testify in present day does not vindicate or erase what he did in the past.
And I just want to be clear before we go, Merrick Garland was asked about what this might mean for the former president and whether there will be charges. Depending on who you ask, there was an NPR Marist poll where people were very, very skeptical that the former president would ever be charged with a crime. We should level set. There's still no clarity on whether or not this is going to lead to like major charges against the president, the administration. That still remains a huge question mark at best, I think, right?
I think the poll you're talking about, if we're talking about the same one, said 61%. Yeah. There it is, right there. 61% said that no, he would not be charged. Now, that, by the way, is maybe one of the biggest things Merrick Garland is thinking about, because the January 6th committee has been like a grand jury. It's a one-sided affair. We've only heard the best evidence the, quote, prosecution has to offer. Merrick Garland has to be much more broad-based in his thinking. He has to consider potential defenses. And looking at just that poll number, consider that a jury is a cross-section of America. You might get people who are answering that poll question saying, not only do I not believe he should be charged, or that he will be charged, and that he shouldn't be charged. Therefore, Garland has to look at all of those factors.
NBC legal analyst Danny Savalos and Hugo Lowell of The Guardian. Gentlemen, thank you both. Appreciate you making time for us tonight. Well, President Biden kept a pretty full schedule today. Yesterday, the White House announced that he had tested positive for COVID. Apparently, that's not slowing him down. In a video, the president said he's vaccinated and double boosted and feeling fine despite some minor symptoms. Now, Mr. Biden is 79 years old. That puts him at higher risk. That is why doctors urge us to get vaccinated and to use trusted antiviral treatments. And that is why the White House says the president is doing well.
Given how much immunity he has from vaccines, given that he was started on treatments right away, like literally had symptoms this morning, got started on Paxlovid this morning, I think all of those things very dramatically reduce his risk of serious illness. And that's really the goal here, is to prevent serious illness, to keep that risk as low as possible.
Yesterday, President Biden signed the Formula Act into law. It's designed to increase access to baby formula. We'll have more on that later in the show. But the president testing positive does raise some questions about the latest COVID treatments that are available now. So let's get into those questions with Dr. Jeremy Faust. He is an emergency physician at Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital and the editor-in-chief of MedPage Today. Dr. Faust, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to see you.
I don't know how much we know about the variant that the president has or the way that he got infected, but I wonder what your thoughts are on the fact that he got infected, considering that he is double vaccinated and double boosted, and that there is this new Omicron variant, BA.5, floating around that we're told is hyper contagious. What does his infection tell you, if anything?
His infection tells me that, indeed, it's a very contagious variant environment that we have. Whether he has BA.5, which is probably likely or not, we now know that these variants are increasingly contagious, either due to a biological property within the virus, or just due to its ability to evade the immune system, the immune defenses we have a little bit. But I agree with Dr. Jha. The fact that he's up and around and working is a victory for science. We have a lot of things that we didn't have when President Trump came down with COVID-19. We have vaccines, we have antivirals. And so it's a very different landscape. So he's got to walk this line between saying, look, the science is keeping me safe, but also this is still a dangerous virus that not everybody wants to get. Nobody wants to get it.
One more cut we should play from Dr. Ashish Jha in terms of the treatments that are available. Listen.
And it's a reminder of the reason that we all work so hard to make sure that every American has the same level of protection that the president has, that every American has the same level of immunity, and why we have worked so hard to make sure that people have access to life-saving treatments like Paxlovid.
Dr. Faust, what about that in terms of access? How well have we done in making sure that everyone across the country has access to Paxlovid and life-saving treatments?
It's a mixed record. On one hand, you could say that there is Paxlovid available in almost every county in the country. On the other hand, you could say that in counties where you have Black or Hispanic people as a majority, that's far less likely to be the case in terms of, is there a Paxlovid dispensary or availability anywhere near you? It's one thing to have it in the county, but if you live in a large county, that's not good enough. So we know there's deserts, there's disparities. And so Kaiser Foundation has a good report on this, and I'm hearing from all kinds of data sets that basically Paxlovid is unfortunately going to people who don't need it. The people who are actually have fewer health risks, people who are wealthy, people who have health care. And actually, we looked at this on my newsletter as well. You look at states where the vaccination rate is the highest. Those are the places where Paxlovid is being used the most. And those are the people who probably need it the least. You need it in places like the South, where vaccination rates are lower, because Paxlovid was really shown to have a huge impact in the unvaccinated. Now, it does have an effect, we think, in the vaccinated with higher risks, older people. That data is from post-marketing studies, observational data that suggests that. So that's why President Biden is taking it. But in reality, the people who need it most are the unvaccinated, people who have lots and lots of risk factors. And frankly, we just haven't done a good job of getting these treatments equally distributed, especially commensurate to the risk that people have.
I should have asked you this first, but could you just briefly explain what is Paxlovid? And is it a substitute for getting vaccinated?
Paxlovid is no substitute for vaccination. It's an antiviral medication that slows down the virus's ability to replicate itself. That's a very good thing that it works. It was shown, as I mentioned, it was shown in the trial that was done, in a randomized trial, to decrease the progression to severe disease and very serious disease among the unvaccinated. We think that's probably the case among the vaccinated as well, just less bang for your buck, less return on investment. So for older people with risk factors, even if you're vaccinated, it's still useful. So it's an antiviral that can certainly help people who are unvaccinated, probably helps some people who are vaccinated. And indeed, it's just one weapon. But I also think that it's no substitute for vaccination, because the big thing that keeps you alive and out of the hospital is having a recent vaccination if you're older. Not enough people in this country are up to date on their vaccines in the 50-plus age group, and that's where we see hospitalizations and deaths really pile up, even now.
And before I have to let you go, very briefly, doctor, I know a number of people who are like, I'm going to get COVID sooner or later. It's going to happen. The various variants keep getting more and more contagious. And there are so many contagions floating around right now, monkeypox, and now there's a polio case in New York State, like, it's going to get me sooner or later. Should we just assume sooner or later that everybody's going to get COVID, or is it still possible for people who've not been infected to remain uninfected if they do everything they need to do?
It's getting harder to imagine a world in which you can avoid this forever. But we have a new vaccine coming this fall, which could make a dent. We are also developing, the scientists are developing other vaccine formulations, which may have a better record in terms of keeping us protected from infection. We may have better therapeutics coming down the road. Look, I think it's getting harder and harder to avoid this thing. President Biden didn't do everything he could have done to avoid infection. He was not wearing a mask. He was doing a fist bump, but he also was not wearing a mask. So that was confusing. You can do a lot of things to avoid this virus, but it's basically a law of sort of a game of chance. And as time goes on, the odds kind of catch up with you. So the answer to your question is, I think you can avoid it, but it's getting harder and harder.
Dr. Jeremy Faust, appreciate you talking this through with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come, the state of abortion in North Carolina. We will dig into a controversial bill there. It would sentence women who get abortions to the death penalty. But there's more about this that you need to know. We'll get into that next. And later, it could be one of America's toughest dinner reservations to get. A service run by refugees in Montana, making meals with a mission. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. What if abortion was punishable by death? A legislator in North Carolina tried to make that happen in his state last year. Back in February of 2021, State Representative Larry Pittman filed that bill. It reads in part, quote, Any person who willfully seeks to destroy the life of another person by any means at any stage of life or succeeds in doing so shall be held accountable for attempted murder or for first-degree murder, respectively, unquote. First-degree murder charges for getting an abortion, and in North Carolina, murder one is a capital crime. So how far did this bill go? Pretty much nowhere. 4 Republicans signed on to it, and the bill was referred to a number of committees, but it never came up for a vote. So why bother talking about it? Frankly, because someone on social media brought it up and got it wrong. This week, the founder of the youth activism group Voters of Tomorrow tweeted that the bill was just introduced. That was incorrect. As we said, it came up last year, but the tweet went viral, got more than 110,000 likes, more than 20,000 retweets, and counting. Joining us now is Sarah Pequeño, an opinion writer for the News and Observer. Ms. Pequeño, welcome. Good to have you with us. Tell us more about this bill. Did this bill ever really have a chance of moving forward, or does it have a chance of being reintroduced now? Could it survive now?
Honestly, I think the best quote that I've heard about this bill comes from a Western Carolina University professor named Chris Cooper, who said that this bill was basically dead the moment that Larry Pittman thought it up. This bill was not going to go anywhere. There was no chance of it going anywhere because, I mean, North Carolina is a very purple state. And because this is a constitutional amendment, it's something that would have to go on the ballot, which, you know, ballots are starting to be printed right now, where early voting starts in 3 weeks. It's not something that would go anywhere now. You know, I think the scary thing about this bill is that it normalizes violence against people. And I think it's really scary to, even as someone that, you know, thinks about abortion a lot in North Carolina, know that, you know, there are people like this that really, you know, do want to do harm to people that are seeking abortion or that are providing abortions in North Carolina.
Give me your sense, and I know that you're an opinion writer, so I want to hear your particular perspective on where the conversation about abortion in North Carolina stands now after the ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson, where the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood v. Casey. What's that conversation like right now among people like yourself who are concerned about access to abortion coverage, abortion care?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we are very understanding right now that abortion rights in North Carolina are hanging on by a thread. You know, I think Cooper, I mentioned this in a story I wrote today, but there was a 2019 bill called the Born Alive bill that was punishing abortion care providers if babies were born, you know, alive, and they failed to resuscitate them after a failed abortion. That's something that doesn't happen. You know, that's something that there's already laws on the books to keep from happening. In North Carolina, abortion has been a really big issue. There's already a 72-hour waiting period for abortion in North Carolina. There are only 9 counties in the 100 counties in this state where you can get an abortion. I'm from a rural community in North Carolina originally, and I would have had, if I had needed an abortion in high school, I would have had to drive 45 minutes at least to get an abortion. And now we're starting to see an influx of people from other states because we are obviously in the South, and the South has restricted abortion very strongly. And so we're seeing an influx of people from neighboring states.
I have to say, we did kind of level set on this at the beginning, that this bill is not moving and that the tweet about the bill was inaccurate. And if there is one thing that I absolutely hate, that anyone who's worked with me will tell you, it's getting facts wrong. I do not like cleaning up other people's messes. On top of that, the governor, Roy Cooper, signed an executive order to protect access to reproductive health care. This week, North Carolina's attorney general said they're not going to renew the 20-week abortion ban. A federal judge blocked that in 2019. This feels like it has infused a lot of heat and very little light into the conversation about abortion in North Carolina. So on one hand, my eyes are rolling in the back of my head at having to clean up somebody's misinformation. On the other hand, I understand the fear that is wrapped around this. Where do you think all of this is going in North Carolina, despite this tweet being flat out wrong?
I'm glad you said that. My eyes definitely rolled in the back of my head, too. I feel like since I saw this tweet, I guess Monday, I feel like I've been just trying to correct people this entire time. I think I'd be lying if I said I wasn't very unsure about the state of abortion in North Carolina. Right now, the Republicans don't have a majority or a supermajority in the legislature, but that could change come November. Roy Cooper is finishing up his term in 2024. He's not allowed to run again. There's issues between the leaders in the General Assembly and Attorney General Josh Stein over, not enforcing this abortion rights bill. And the Speaker of the House and the Leader of the Senate have said that they want to restrict abortion rights in North Carolina and in state, make it harder for people to get the care that they need and deserve.
Sarah Pequeño of the News and Observer, glad to have you on with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including a terrifying moment for a congressman on the campaign trail, a deal with Russia to get grain out of blocked ports in Ukraine, and the latest on America's baby formula shortage. That's all just ahead. Stay close. Tonight's headlines begin with Ukraine. The invasion there is hurting the world's food supply, but a new deal backed by the UN could help ease that. The deal would resume exports of Ukrainian grain. Millions of tons of grain have been sitting in silos and ports there for months, and that has created a serious global food crisis. This deal could change that. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the world will have to make sure Russia makes good on the deal. Meanwhile, the Russian assault continues in eastern Ukraine, and the Biden administration is preparing to send its 16th shipment of weapons to the Ukrainian military. NBC's Ali Arouzi has more from Kyiv. Hey, Ali.
Hi, Joshua. So after months of difficult negotiations in Turkey, a deal has been struck to get all of this blocked Ukrainian grain out of the country and to places that it's needed the most. But interestingly, Joshua, it's a mirror agreement. It means that Kyiv and Moscow didn't sign the agreement together. The agreement was signed by both sides with the UN and with the Turks because the Ukrainians didn't want to sign a document with the Russians out of principle. But now that it has been made, these cargo ships will be taking grain out of 3 Ukrainian ports, Chermanorsk, Pivdani, and Odessa. From there, they're going to go to the Bosphorus. The plan will be overseen by a joint coordination committee based in Istanbul, and that'll involve monitors from the UN and from the Turks. There will be inspectors on these boats to make sure contraband, mainly weapons, doesn't come back into Ukraine. That was a specification that the Russians made. The Russians wanted these cargo ships to be escorted by their navy, but that was a deal breaker in the talks. The UN and the Ukrainians agreed that the areas around the Ukrainian ports don't need to be demined, but a Ukrainian pilot will escort these boats to travel through channels where there are no mines, and they can guide the ships safely through these places. But the UN also said that this was a very important deal to be made. Let's take a listen to what the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, had to say.
And let there be no doubt, this is an agreement for the world. It will bring relief for developing countries on the edge of bankruptcy and the most vulnerable people on the edge of famine. This initiative must be fully implemented because the world so desperately needs it to tackle the global food crisis.
And Joshua, as you know, Ukraine is one of the world's leading grain exporters, but since the beginning of this war, not much of it has been able to get out. Last year, Ukrainian grain fed over 400 million people. It's most of those in the developing world, very vulnerable people who are facing food shortages. But even though this grain has got out, the fighting, the bloodshed in this country hasn't stopped. The fighting still rages on the eastern front of Ukraine. The Donetsk area is being heavily bombed by the Russians as they try to take the whole Donbass. Kharkiv was hit again yesterday. 3 people were killed in Kharkiv. And last night, the Russians launched over 100 missiles into the Dnipro area, killing 1 person and injuring dozens more. But the Ukrainians are also seeing some sort of a victory here because of these Western weapons that are being supplied to them. Just today, President Zelensky said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal that Ukrainian losses are now significantly less in this war than they were before, and that's mainly because of these MLRSs, these high-precision rocket systems that are making a real impact on the Ukrainians. The MI6, the British intelligence, even made an assessment today saying that the Russians may lose some steam in this war and they may retreat for a while until they can replenish and regroup, and that would give the Ukrainians a chance to give a counterstrike on the Russians.
All right, thank you, Ali. That's NBC's Ali Arouzi reporting from Kyiv. President Biden is condemning an attack at a political campaign event. Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin is running for governor of New York. Last night, he was apparently attacked on stage.
There's only one option.
What is he doing?
You're done. You're done. You're done. You are done.
You can see that thing that's got 2 prongs in the guy's right hand, what looks like some sort of sharp object moving toward Congressman Zeldin's throat. He caught the man's wrist before they fell to the ground. One witness described that 2-pronged thing as a common self-defense instrument. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office identified the suspect as 43-year-old David Jakubonis. Members of the public and Zeldin's campaign restrained him with zip ties, then police took him into custody. Now he faces felony charges of 2nd-degree attempted assault. After the attack, the congressman went back on stage and finished his speech. Apparently, nobody was hurt. Later, he expressed his appreciation to everyone who helped subdue the attacker. Mr. Jakubonis was arraigned and released overnight. Lee Zeldin says he'll increase security on the campaign trail. There's no word so far on a motive, and we are still trying to make contact with the suspect. A new federal law could make it easier to get baby formula back in stock across America. This week, President Biden signed the Formula Act. The bipartisan bill suspends tariffs on formula for the rest of the year. The goal is to lower the cost, but experts say the shortage will still last for months, and many mothers are still struggling to feed their babies. NBC's Isa Gutierrez has more.
Week after week, Operation Fly Formula shipments have landed at U.S. airports. By Sunday, the federal program expects to have delivered enough formula for over 60 million 8-ounce bottles to the U.S. from overseas. Places like Singapore, Switzerland, and the U.K., to name a few. But the shortage isn't over. Experts tell us that could still be months away.
If you don't think this is an issue, check your local grocery store.
On Tuesday, Mandy Hansen from Indianapolis got down to 10 ounces of formula.
That would last her basically an evening.
Her daughter, Magnolia, is 6 months old and allergic to milk protein. She says she hits 5 stores around town regularly with no luck. But when she does find more than a couple bottles,
I feel like I hit the lottery. Like, I feel like I've just found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's like, oh my goodness, I finally, I'm going to be able to last 6 days without having to worry about how I'm going to feed my baby. But, 3 days later, I'm like, oh, I'm back in this panic mode again.
Desperate for help this week, Hansen posted on Facebook.
I even made it public so maybe people would share to try to help us out.
She's received 10 bottles since her post, but she worries for others.
Most people are having to resort to still pretty dramatic lengths to get formula. In some cases, even in cities, having to drive up to 80 miles just to be able to find a place that actually dispenses their particular brand of formula that might be at a discount or even at cost through special programs like Women, Infants, and Children. And then in rural areas, I've heard of patients that have to travel hours.
Operation Fly Formula is one of the White House's efforts to combat the shortage, also easing import rules for foreign manufacturers and invoking federal emergency rules to prioritize domestic production. Glenn Kepke has worked in supply chain for over 20 years.
The White House efforts have helped slightly But what we need is the manufacturers to continue to ramp up production and get to a stable state. We're anticipating this to continue for at least another 2 months.
Like, it shouldn't be this way. Our children should be the first and forefront of everybody's mind.
That was NBC's Isa Gutierrez reporting. Up next, the heat. America's power systems are getting pushed to their limits. Texas is being hit especially hard, and cryptocurrency is one culprit. We'll explain when we come back. This summer has brought one heat wave after another. Triple-digit temperatures have scorched crops all season long. Farm animals have been suffering under these high temperatures too. And for millions of us across America, this weekend will not bring any relief. NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns has our forecast. Hey, Bill.
Joshua, we are definitely 100% in that part of the summer where everyone's like, okay, yep, that was good. Let's quiet it down a little bit. Let's cool it off a little. But that's not going to be this weekend. I mean, many areas of the country are going to see their hottest weekend of the summer, and especially some of the big cities on the I-95 corridor. So by the numbers, and I haven't not shown this graphic in maybe a month. I mean, we've always had someone under heat advisories or heat warnings. We got 84 million people. It goes from the desert Southwest, from Arizona, all the way back up into areas of Utah. Of course, a lot of the Midwest and the central portion of the country is included in heat advisories. And then we have that little area on the East Coast, especially in the Mid-Atlantic region. Philadelphia is under an excessive heat warning through the weekend. New York City is under a heat advisory. The difference between the two, by the way, is a heat warning is more severe. That's where they're really worried about people losing their lives, especially if they don't have air conditioning, the elderly or the young children. Heat advisory is the next level down. Still dangerous, especially if you're going to be outside. So how hot will we be on your Saturday? We won't see triple digits on Saturday in the Northeast. Better chance of that will be on Sunday, but we're still going to see humid air and very hot. I mean, Raleigh's going to be 98 with a heat index, feels like temperature of 103. New York City, about mid-90s once again. That could be the warmest day so far of the summer. And then your typical hundreds in Texas. And by the way, Dallas should be 99 this time of year, so that's not that unusual to be around 101. Wichita, Kansas, 103 is pretty hot by your standards. And then what do we do Sunday into next week? You will notice the cool down. Areas like New York City, Washington, D.C., Boston, cold front goes through Monday night, Tuesday morning. So Tuesday will be cooler, but we still have two very warm and then humid days. That's going to be Sunday and Monday. D.C., notice that 99 degrees forecast high on Sunday. It's been 6 years since we hit 100 degrees. Middle of the country, same thing. Temperatures are going to be very warm in Memphis. We do get a little cool down for you in St. Louis, but not so lucky in areas of the South. And as far as what we're dealing with records, these are the areas that have the best chance for records. All the red dots on this map, Hartford, Boston, Albany, Newark, Allentown, Reading, Philadelphia, those are all areas that we expect to tie or break the record highs on Sunday. And it does look like the hottest temperatures will be Sunday afternoon, where we should be peaking out in the upper 90s in most areas. And in case you're wondering when it's ever going to cool down, not anytime soon. The East Coast remains well above average. This is the forecast for the last week of July. And the new heat wave is expected in the Pacific Northwest. If there's one spot in the country that hasn't been panicking about how hot it's been, it's the Pacific Northwest, but it looks like your turn is next week. And then finally, to all of our friends from Minneapolis into areas of Wisconsin, you do have a chance of some very strong thunderstorms as we go through Saturday afternoon, and it does look like we could even see some isolated tornadoes out of this. So just something to keep in mind for your afternoon and evening plans from Minneapolis over to Green Bay and just north of Chicago, Joshua. So stay cool this weekend. Hopefully next week we'll have some better news for you.
Hopefully, yeah. Stay cool. Hydrate. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Thank you, Bill. That's NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns. This kind of heat can make keeping cool a matter of life and death. Power outages can make that dangerously tough. As Bill mentioned, Texas is roasting right now, and that is pushing its power grid to its breaking point. Again, we've talked about power in Texas before with the other extreme. You might remember last February, millions of homes lost power in a deep freeze. It's estimated that up to 200 people died. But cold is not the issue now. And really, heat may only be part of it. One growing issue is cryptocurrency and the business of making digital money, called crypto mining. Texas attracts some of the world's biggest crypto companies, and those companies use a lot of power. In the coming years, by one estimate, they could suck up 18 gigawatts of power, 18 billion watts. 1 gigawatt is enough to power about 10 million light bulbs. Let's get into that with NBC's Gretchen Morgensen, a senior financial reporter for our investigations unit. Her new story is called, "Can the Fragile Texas Power Grid Handle a Crypto Mining Gold Rush?" Gretchen, first of all, let's explain Texas's power grid again for those who may not recall. It's got its own grid with an organization called ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. How does Texas use and regulate power, and why is that such a factor in this emergency?
Well, Joshua, you're right. Texas is unique in its power grid because it is a standalone power grid. It does not tap into any other state's electricity grids. So when there are problems in Texas, that means Texas has to deal with them. It can't tap into neighboring states. Now, the reason that happened was back in the 30s when the Congress wrote a law about having the federal government overseeing the transmission of electricity. Texas didn't want to be a part of that. And so they have their own grid. It is unique, it stands alone, and they have to deal with problems when they arise.
How far is the grid in Texas being stretched right now? I mean, how much more can it take?
Well, right now they have the cushion that they normally have, which is about 5,000 megawatts. They like to run with that kind of a cushion. When it gets to be about half that amount, they then ask people to conserve energy, to cut back on your usage. And that's exactly what they did last week. And so this is a situation where they have a lot of different pieces of a puzzle that have to fit together. And when you have a lot of, they do have wind power, for instance, but sometimes the wind isn't as productive for them, and so that creates a problem. They are okay right now, but as these temperatures continue at these high levels, they will undoubtedly go back to the conservation that they've been.
Let's talk about crypto mining. Things like Bitcoin and Ethereum are created, are mined, by computers that perform hyper-complex computations. And by solving these computations, kind of feeding them to a system, it spits out currency. That takes an immense amount of processor power. Your laptop at home is not enough to be able to do modern-day crypto mining. But how much power are we talking about, Gretchen? I mean, is this a huge drag on the system? Is this just a drop in the bucket? How big is it?
It's an enormous drag on the system, Joshua. Now, ERCOT would not tell me how much electricity the current Bitcoin and other crypto miners in Texas are tapping from the system. They wouldn't tell me that. But they did say that they anticipate it, as you pointed out in the beginning, to be 18 gigs at some point. Right now, the system is 80. So you can see how big a proportion that is. Now, the system will grow, of course, from 80, but we're talking about an immense drain, an immense amount of energy that is being used in Texas. And, you know, the problem for some people who have been, you know, living in these areas where they're building these mines is they're concerned that it's going to impact the price of electricity for them. And studies have shown that when Bitcoin miners come into an area, the price of electricity for everybody does increase. And that is a concern for people, especially now with inflation and the cost of living going up.
I hate to sound cynical, but having lived and worked in and covered Silicon Valley, a lot of the ecological messaging is very loud and clear and resounding until it impacts the bottom line. And then a lot of tech companies get very reticent to go green if it's going to cost them money. What's the outlook in terms of making crypto mining in Texas more sustainable, on making it rely more on renewable resources so everyday people don't get pinched?
Well, what would have to happen, Joshua, is for there to be more infrastructure built in Texas that relies on green energy. Right now, about 22% of the grid consists of solar and wind. And that's really great because it's gone up, but it really needs to be more, because when you have this constant 24/7 demand of the Bitcoin miners, you're going to use a lot of fossil fuels to be able to tap into that energy. As Texas increases the infrastructure with wind and solar, that will be helpful. But right now, you're still talking about a relatively small percentage. So that needs to grow, and that doesn't happen overnight.
NBC senior financial reporter Gretchen Morgensen. Gretchen, appreciate you breaking this down for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua.
In Montana, they've got something truly special cooking, and good luck getting a reservation. A dinner service run by refugees is getting rave reviews. Steve Patterson has our feature report before we go. In Missoula, Montana, one of the most popular places to eat is run almost entirely by refugees. A relocation program is supporting immigrants and refugees, helping them establish themselves in the community. And it's introducing locals to other cuisines and cultures. Tonight's feature report comes to us from NBC's Steve Patterson. Hey, Steve.
Yeah, Joshua, this tiny little kitchen in Missoula, Montana truly is getting buzz across the country. We wanted to find out why, and a big reason, as we learned personally, is it has a lot to do with the delicious food really from across the world, but also it's so much more than that. Take a look.
Nestled deep beneath the rolling hills that cradle scenic downtown Missoula, you might be surprised to learn that for a world-renowned meal, the hottest ticket in town isn't one of the restaurants on Main Street. Not even close. In fact, it's not a restaurant at all. At the start of any given week, enticing smells from Syria to Iraq, Congo to Pakistan waft and rise from this tiny basement kitchen underneath this unassuming Methodist church. Last week, you could have caught a hint of curry simmering in Harun Hassani's chicken murr, highlighted with a splash of dal.
You're not nervous?
No.
There's going to be a lot of people in here, Harun.
No, I am good. I'm excited.
Harun, an Afghan evacuee from Parwan, is beaming between making more than 100 meals for Missoula's United We Eat, a once-a-week meal service that pays refugee and immigrant chefs to cook an array of takeout meals for the community. And the community is obsessed.
Everything I've tried so far has been great.
You know, we try to order almost every week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
For most of Missoula, I think that this is probably their best opportunity to get exposure to diverse food.
And that's the deal. The chefs get to share their food, express their culture, and provide for their families, while every week, Missoula gets another taste of the world. And it's a big hit.
It's good.
So far, nearly $50,000 has been paid to more than 24 chefs who've cooked nearly 6,000 meals for the community. The program is so popular now that when the digital menu goes live to more than 2,000 participants at the end of every week, meals typically sell out in less than 30 minutes.
We set reminders on our phones for Thursday morning at 9 a.m.
Are you surprised by the amount of demand that it's generated?
Not at all. This town is hungry for what we offer.
Program manager Beth Baker says the initiative is a cornerstone of Soft Landing Missoula, an assistance organization for refugees and immigrants that started back in 2015 during the war in Syria, when Montana was one of 2 states that wasn't accepting refugees.
I think it offers an enormous amount of dignity. These folks often come from cultures where sharing food and hospitality and generosity are significant parts of their culture. And to be able to offer that to the Missoula community is a really important thing for them.
It was really important for 23-year-old Roseanne Shabib.
They make us like to feel we are welcome here, and they like refugee and immigrant to share food.
Roseanne fled the war in Syria with her family and spent more than 7 years in Cairo after escaping Damascus, waiting to be resettled as a refugee. After cooking with her mom for the program, she was hired on as a full-time assistant kitchen manager because she loves to teach.
I have a lot of questions about, okay, like what the ingredients, why you put this, and why you make this with this, and how you know that. And I love when they ask me like this question, because I want everyone to know, like, okay, more experience they will get, like they will take from us more experience.
On this particular week, we caught Roseanne keeping Harun focused.
This one is good.
Spinach should be along that wall.
While kitchen manager Casey Chapman scrambles to make sure they have everything they need for an Afghan feast.
Hopefully, that'll work great.
Not the easiest thing to do in the middle of the Mountain West.
About half of my job is just grocery shopping and tracking down specific ingredients for our chefs. We want it to be as authentic as possible, even in Missoula, Montana.
And authenticity in service, culture, and ownership that's allowed young men and women like Haroon to thrive.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is very good. I thinking about the future. Maybe I will make a restaurant or cook Afghani foods. This is good for me for future and everything. Enjoy.
Finding the freedom of peace through a prism of love, the barrier-breaking, universal language of good food.
And so the program United We Eat, they say right now they are in what they call the dreaming phase. They love what they're doing right now, of course, but they would love to be able to create their own space so chefs can be in there 7 days a week, you know, creating, trading ideas. Right now they rent that kitchen out only 2 days a week, so they'd love to expand in a few years, but they still are making people so happy and cultivating those dreams. Haroon, in that piece, by the way, he's been in the States like less than 2 years, didn't even know Montana existed before he came over, but he loves the community now, and the creation there has inspired him to sort of start his own dream. He would love to create his own restaurant in town, fill it with Afghan food, and serve the community. Everybody is dreaming right now, of course, but that's something that is only sparked by the creativity and the community there at United We Eat. Back to you, Josh.
Very cool. Thank you, Steve. That's NBC Steve Patterson with that report. Well, I'm hungry now, so show's over. But thank you for making time for us, and please do stay in touch with us this weekend with your thoughts and questions on anything we covered tonight. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. You can always leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Enjoy your weekend. Please drink more water than you think you need. Hydrate. Heat is no joke. See you Monday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.